What on earth is this video about? Hey guys, welcome back. In today's video, we are going into part 2 of the Ty Lee cosplay. So if you missed my last video, that is where I shared how I made her top, and you can check it out up there. But in this video, we are going into how I made her pants and the floppy skirt thing. Yes, it goes like this. So with that, let's roll the footage. So as you may or may not know, drafting patterns has historically been a bit of a struggle for me. But I actually got pretty lucky here because I already had some pants that were kind of similar to Ty Lee's. My pants were a bit less fluffy than I needed, but using them to create a base pattern made it a lot easier to understand how this kind of pattern works, since this is the first pair of pants I've sewn ever. But if you're trying to make poofy pants yourself, you don't need to have pants to work from because you get to use the template that I made for you right here. So basically, this is the pattern for one leg. To explain what you're looking at, one side is the front of the leg and the other is the back. And you'll cut out mirror images of this pattern for the left and the right leg. You sew the side seams together to ultimately create this into a tube, so you have two tubes, then connect the tubes at the crotch area to finish the pants. So to add the measurements here, for the waistband, I measured my lower waist, then added about 12 inches so that I'd have enough fabric to gather to create that ultimate poofiness. And then I divided that number in half since this pattern is just for one leg. For the crotch swoops, you can hang the measuring tape between your legs. I did not film a demo for this, but you get the idea. Hang it from front to back to determine how low you want the crotch to hang, then divide it into the swoopy parts. I personally made the back crotch swoop a little bit longer than the front crotch swoop because butts exist, but honestly, since these pants are so baggy, that didn't matter at all. You could just make them identical. For the height from the waist to the cuff, I measured down from my lower waist down to just past the knee, then added a few inches to allow for the ballooning effect. And to determine the width, I tried to levitate a tape measure around my knee to estimate how big I wanted that poofiness to be, and then use that measurement for the bottom. I didn't really worry about tapering it too much because it's gonna get gathered up into the actual cuff anyway. Now, before cutting out the pants, I decided to draft the waistband. I don't remember why, but that's what my footage shows that I did next. So this half trapezoid shape was based on taking measurements of where I wanted the top of the waistband to hit and the bottom of the waistband to hit, then dividing each of those measurements by 4. Except when making a mock-up, I did this awesome thing where I forgot to pay attention to which side was sloped and ended up cutting it out like this. Luckily, it was just a mock-up, so I did some surgery and pretended it never happened. And after a little finagling and pattern adjustment, it finally worked, yay! Finally, I felt emotionally prepared to actually cut out the pants. Now, I like to trace the patterns without seam allowance so that I can see a clear stitching line and then also cut out a huge seam allowance around that in case my measurements turn out too small. But if you are more confident in your measurements, then go ahead and just add the seam allowance right into your pattern. Now, like I mentioned in the last video, I did order some disappearing ink pens, which were awesome. Watch this. Okay, so fine, the ink didn't fully disappear on some of the fabric, which is why testing is so important. But ultimately I'm happy because I could use it on the backside of my satin and not have to deal with chalk like a sucker. Just kidding, if you use chalk, it's okay. You'll make it. I did it, you can do it too. I believe in you. Then I needed to cut out some rectangles for the leg cuffs because they actually needed to be sewn onto the bottom before sewing the legs up. So I measured the circumference of the space between my calf and my knee and came up with like 5 different measurements each time, but I went with the biggest one because I knew it would have to fit over my calf and I could always make it smaller with elastic. I also added interfacing to make it stronger and made a lining for the cuff out of softer fabric so I wouldn't have to live with that plasticky taffeta against my skin if I ever do get to wear this to an actual con and not just around my house in quarantine. So I sewed the facing and the lining right sides together and then top stitched it to keep it flat, and then gathered the pants leg using a simple gathering technique. To do this, you just sew 2 parallel lines on the longest stitch length and leave lots of extra thread on each end. Then grab the 2 threads on one side of the fabric and wrap them around a pin to keep them in place. Then you can pull the threads on the other side and fiddle with it to create an even gather. Once I had it even and looking good, I sewed the gathers down to the lining. Okay, so we are almost done with the cuffs here. So we have the lining layer, they're sewn together, then we have the facing layer. So what I did is I folded in what I want to be hidden, and this is going to cover that up here, and I'm just going to do a top stitch here because I don't really care if there's going to be a stitch visible. It's going to be mostly covered by the fabric that overhangs it. So let's go get this stitched up. Ladies and gentlemen, we now interrupt your regularly scheduled programming for a small disaster. So if you are a machine sewist, you're probably no stranger to tangled bobbin thread. This is just par for the course. But this time, no matter what I did, my machine was convinced that this was the end of the world.
Fire! Oh, fire! Oh my goodness!
And then some of the thread got actually stuck down inside. And at that point, I knew it was finally time to figure out how to open up my machine. Now, I make it look easy here, but what you don't see is the 30 minutes it took trying to figure out how to unscrew the freaking screws that held this cover down. I tried mini screwdrivers, I tried my fingernails, I tried screaming into the abyss, but the only thing that worked was, of course, a butter knife. And after all that, I was ready to do some damage. But after using my Nintendo game cartridge skills to clear away any dust, nothing actually looked wrong. So I finally just read the troubleshooting section of the manual and realized that somehow I just hadn't threaded it right. Golly jeepers, you'd think I'd know these things by now. With that out of the way, I finished top stitching the cuffs, then sewed up the legs right sides together. Then I pinned those 2 leg noodles at the crotch to test the fit, and then waddled over to the camera to talk to you. Ow. Gotta be very careful. So I think these are gonna fit really nicely. The one thing is I forgot to leave room in the leg cuffs for all that extra bunched fabric. So they fit perfectly, which means that I can never have another leg day ever, because if my calves get bigger, I don't know if I'll be able to fit these on. But for right now, it means it's perfect because they basically just stay up on their own. I don't need to add any elastic like I was initially planning. All right, let's get this crotch sewn up so we can move on to the skirt. To begin the skirt, I used a pattern that I made earlier to cut out the waistband's facing, lining, and interfacing. Once the interfacing was attached to the facing, I then sewed the front and the back facing pieces together, and then the front and the back lining pieces together, and then attached those pieces at the top right sides together. At last, it was time to start the flappy part of the skirt thing. I keep calling it the skirt thing. We can just call it a skirt. Okay, so before I drafted the skirt flaps, I spent some time deep diving into exactly what those flaps looked like. And I found something disturbing. So let me start this by saying I hold nothing against the Avatar animators because obviously they created one of the best animated shows of all time. That said, I've spent a lot of time combing back through the scenes where Ty Lee shows up, and it seems like the animators could never quite decide whether her skirt had 5 flaps or 6. I'm going to insert some screenshots here so you can see what I mean. So in some scenes, she clearly has 5 flaps on her skirt. You can count them out, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. There are 5. In other scenes, you can clearly, or mostly clearly, see that there are 6 flaps, which makes my accuracy-loving heart just break because obviously I cannot have both 5 and 6 flaps at the same time. I could try. That doesn't make any sense. Basically though, I just had to decide and I'm gonna go with 5. it will look the best from the front, because that means that the edges of the flaps, like where they meet, will be over both of my legs, so that when I raise my legs, I don't know, you can't even see what I'm doing. When I raise my legs, they'll go right through the flaps, and that just makes sense. That just makes sense. So let's go do that. Okay, in hindsight, yes, there are probably 6 flaps, but I did 5. And by the time I'm recording this voiceover, it's done, so there. So to draft the flap pattern, I took the measurement of the bottom edge of the waistband, then divided that by 5 to determine the flap width. Then I drew a slightly acute angle for the bottom and made the length of the whole thing plenty long so I could have lots of room to play. By the way, it ended up being about 12.5 inches plus seam allowance. And a note on colors, by the way. I just want to call this out because it's important to me, but I know no one else notices. So I spent a lot of time analyzing Ty Lee's outfit, obviously. And if you want to be as anal as yours truly, you may notice that she has 3 different colors going on. So you have the pink base, of course. Then the neck piece is made from the same fabric as the waistband, leg cuffs, and arm cuffs. But the skirt flaps are their own thing, just in case you're as obsessive as I am. So I pinned the pieces right side together, turned them all inside out, ironed them crisp, and then top stitched them to keep them flat. Then I spent forever making sure that it would lay well on the actual waistband. I pinned them to the lining, I tried them on, and repinned them, and adjusted the waistband height, and repinned them again before finally getting it all lined up right. This is absolutely the most boring part of the sewing process in my opinion, but this fiddling with the details really does improve the end result. Or so I tell myself. And with the flaps in place, I sewed them to the lining, then folded over the facing and top stitched it down. Okay. So, this is now in one piece. Pretty cool, right? However, as I was trying it on, I noticed something a little weird. It just didn't quite look right. Even with all of the care that I've been putting into the construction of it, something just looked really homemade and bland about it. And I realized after a lot of studying what I have versus studying images of Ty Lee, what I have found is that it's because the flaps are really floppy. If you look at how Ty Lee's skirt moves in the show, they're actually, each of the flaps are pretty heavy. When they fly up as one piece. They're not doing too much of this nonsense. Those aren't steps. Sorry, Fitbit. So if I wanted to replicate that within my skirt, what I should have done is put a layer of interfacing in between the 2 layers of each flap. But I didn't. Now, Jessie from previous videos would have stopped now, would have unstitched everything, and remade each of these with interfacing in the middle layer because I am a perfectionist. However, today's Jessie, the Jessie of this video, is more evolved and can recognize that not all perfectionistic tendencies are helpful. In fact, probably very few of them are. So instead of doing that, instead of going back through and adding interfacing in between each layer, I am choosing just not to. However, if you are making this yourself and you want this to look as fantastic as possible, that is something you may want to consider, is either using a heavier weight material or adding interfacing so that these are a little bit more structured. To finish up the skirt, I sewed on some hook and eye closures. Then, conveniently forgetting how I've given up my perfectionist ways, I re-sewed them in a slightly different place so that they wouldn't show as much. Sorry. So I'd avoided finishing the pants because I'd initially planned to attach the skirt and the pants into one piece. But I like having pieces I can switch out if I ever change sizes or want to remake a piece, so I decided to keep the pants as their own thing. Luckily, I did have some elastic on hand from a certain bed sheet that I had taken apart, waste not, want not. So I spent forever trying to think of the best way to attach these stretchy strings to the pants before finally just sewing a channel and threading it through. Then I sewed the ends of the elastic together and encased it entirely. I also sewed a few vertical stitches in a few places to keep the elastic in place and to keep it from twisting, because twist elastic is the absolute worst. Then at this point, I had the audacity to think I was done. But you and I both know it's never quite that easy. So I literally just uploaded all of my footage and I'm like, yay, we're done, time to move on. And I forgot a very important piece, and that is her wristbands. And there's like little cords on the wristbands as well as on the leg cuffs. Minor details, but I think these can add a lot to the cosplay, make it look just finished, you know? And I will say, as I've been putting on the pants, you know, for trying on different things, I've noticed that the cuffs have been getting a little bit looser. So they were not tight enough, or they're not tight enough anymore to stand up on their own. So I do need something to hold it up. I'm hoping that just adding those cords to it will keep them up and I won't need to sew in elastic, because I'm not totally sure I'm gonna do that at that point, and I don't really want to have to figure it out. So let's get this wrapped up. To make the wrist cuffs, I measured around the top and bottom of my arm where I wanted the cuffs to sit and cut out a curved trapezoid shape. Then I added an inch of overlap for the Velcro and lined it just like everything else. Then I realized that I didn't actually have Velcro. At least, I didn't at first. But then I went voyaging under my husband's computer and found a cord organizer that was indeed made of Velcro. Now to make the cords, I could have just bought ribbon, but I'm not about to run to the store just for some fancy string. So I cut out some strips of fabric to make my own. I sewed a small channel, then carefully turned the whole thing inside out by making a few stitches on one end using a large needle and feeding the needle through the channel. Now I have to warn you, turning something this tiny inside out is kind of awful. It's a massive pain, 10 out of 10 would not recommend, but the results? Worth it. You ready to see?
Hey, look at that dust cloud. It's so poofy.
I don't know any TikTok dances. So I know I look a lot more like Azula today. Ignore that. That went really well. That went really well. I actually completed it in a reasonable amount of time. Had a few hang-ups, but it wouldn't be one of my videos without it. I'm kind of scared of the day that I actually get good enough where there aren't any problems, because it'll be like, is this still me? So there's still a couple things that I would probably consider fixing up, or if you're doing this yourself, things that you may want to keep in mind. First of all, just this is my own thing, but where I put the closure on the skirt, it shows a little bit just because of where I put the clasps. They're a little bit further in, so there's a little bit of flap left open. So I might go back in and add a little bit of Velcro just to keep that down tight. As I mentioned earlier, I would probably add interfacing inside of the skirt flaps. Yeah, I'd probably add interfacing inside of the skirt flaps, or use a heavier material to begin with, something with a little bit more body. Some other heavier woven fabric that doesn't wrinkle. I don't know what that would be. I don't know fabrics that well. Now, there is one more piece of this cosplay that I haven't done yet, and that is, of course, the hair, the wig. I did get a wig to style, which I'm super excited for because I've never done a wig styling this in-depth. Ponytails are definitely a little bit harder, and she has a high ponytail, so it's going to be a challenge to see how I can make that actually sit upright. And I have some ideas. I've been doing some research, so I'm excited to bring that to you. Keep an eye out, that'll be coming out at some point, probably within the next couple weeks, but I'm not gonna put too much pressure because this is something new. And I wanna make sure I do it right, as I do everything. With that, thank you so much for watching this. Just the fact that you got to this point where you're able to hear me say thank you just means the world to me. If you like cosplay, if you like sewing, if you like watching other people do cosplay or watching other people sew and make things, consider sticking around. Would love to have you here. You can subscribe below. You can follow me on Instagram. You can send a pigeon my way. And with that, hope you guys are staying safe. If you're in the US, please keep wearing your masks. We are not out of the weeds yet. Yeah, I'll see you in the next video. Take care, guys. Hello, welcome back. Welcome back, guys. Hello. Hey. Hello. I'm always like, hello. Welcome to today's tutorial. Welcome back. Welcome back. I'm just all full of weird this morning. That was my toe. I know my silver is mostly washing out. It's sad. So, I thought we were done. What up, I'm Sokka. Gonna rock ya. I don't remember the words in between.